wings, 110-pound wing loading, 0.75 thrust to weight ratio. I forget, a lot of other goddamn junk in it. And engine, 2.2 bypass ratio, etc. And so then we ended up, after we went through the trade-offs, because he said, well, how are you going to do it? I said, well, I don't know what the answer is, but here's the way I approach these kind of problems. And I said, I expect we'll do a lot better. We came up with a 40,000-pound airplane with a 1.1 thrust to weight ratio instead of 0.75. Wing loading is 65, and I forget, and there are a number of, but a lot cheaper. And they had one that really, you know, a real Hummer, and that became the F-15. We forced into the trade. I remember we went to engine meeting. I'll give you an example, engine meeting. See, all these engine guys, all they're worried about is turbo machinery and all this crap going on. And so I said, we got to start something fundamental on engine. We all got to start the same departing point, starting point. And I'm going to tell you, we're all going to start the same starting point. I'm going to see if you like mine. I said, here's what I know about engines. Cold air goes in the front door. Hot air goes out the back door. It goes faster, and we call that thrust. Is that a good starting point? Of course, what it is just a clever way of describing Newton's second law, F equals ma, you know, in a fluid sense. And they said, okay. I said, okay, so we're not going to hold. Other than that, we're not going to hold anything else as an assumption. That's the only one we're going to start with. And we're going to work on that. We're going to look at the turbo machinery and all that stuff and see what holds together. With that and hold together, run the trades of the engine. And out of those engine trades, we actually boiled the engine down to a 0.6 bypass ratio. Found out it was. And they never thought that would happen. They weren't looking at it correctly. As a matter of fact, we weren't sure to go 0.6 or turbojet. At that time, they didn't want to go any lower bypass. They said, well, it's fabrication problems and that. I was okay. So then eventually we decided on 0.6, but since then we found out we can make 0.3 and 0.4 lower bypass ratio engines. But at the time we did it, we couldn't do it. It was fabrication. That was a much better engine. But, I mean, that's the kind of stuff you got to do. You don't start. You got to challenge all assumptions. It's like, you know, we have doctrine. Air Force has got a doctrine. The Army's got a doctrine. Navy's got a doctrine. Everybody's got a doctrine. You read my work, doctrine doesn't appear in there even once. You can't find it. You know why I don't have it in there? Because it's doctrine on day one. Every day after it becomes dogma. That's why. And so what I tell people, they say, well, I understand you're going to have to write doctrine. You have to do it. And I say, that's all right. But even after you write it, assume that it's not right. And then not only that, look at a whole bunch of other doctrines, German doctrine, other kind of doctrines, and learn those too. And then you got a bunch of doctrines in there. And the reason why you want to learn them all, then you're not captured by any one. Not only that, you can lift stuff out of here, stuff out of there, stuff out of there. You can play the snowmobile game, and you do better than anybody else. But if you got one doctrine, you're a dinosaur. Period. Go ahead. Uh-oh. The engineering chart, go ahead. Well, he asked me about remember, let the record show. Okay. Even though, in some sense, I was an individual, remember, I had to depend upon other people. I mean, I was doing I'm learning from a lot of these people at the same time in terms of some of these characteristics, even though I set up some of the plans and that. And one of the things I learned a long time ago, all the way up to Nellis and that, is any time that I got a team, I would get a very diverse kind of people in that team with very different skills, different orientation. And it was sort of instinctive. I understand better now why I do that. At that time, you know, it was sort of an instinctive kind of thing. It seemed like the right thing to do. Now I understand better because of some of the things I've been involved in. Because I found out by doing that, I would learn a lot more. In other words, I'm drawn from many different ideas. But then, after you think about that, you can do it not just with working with people, but many other things like doctrine and all the other kind of things I'm talking about. And in large companies, you have to do that. And that's why nowadays they're talking about these multifunctional teams. You heard about that in terms of new designs and all that stuff. And that's the key idea that Taiichi Ohno and Shigeo Shingo brought across. Where General Motors wasn't doing that. They had all these separate little compartments. And they'd get theirs done and pass the next department, get theirs done, pass, and all these guys in this department had like ideas. The guys in this department had like ideas, the guy in this department had like ideas, rather than having a variety of ideas within each department and very rich interconnecting links. And that's what Ono, and that's what Shingo brought to the table. I mean, they were sort of the, sort of the orchestra leader, but, without the orchestra, they can't play. They got to have these different things. They're sort of keeping track of things and that. And so that's where the Toyota production system came out of. You know what Taiichi Ono did, since I didn't bring it up, since you brought it up? One of the things that he saw, he didn't see it. Even in the States here, we still don't understand what Taiichi Ono did. Many people are writing about it. And I get mad when I said, this is baloney. I have read his book, and I know what he's saying. And one of the things he found out, which is hard to believe, I'll tell you how he made his snowmobile, using my term, was he was looking at automobile production. He learned a lot from Henry Ford and from other Americans. A lot of these ideas he got from Americans. And one of the key ideas he got was from supermarket and automobile production. Let me explain how he did it. It's beautiful. It's brilliant. Brilliant. What happened was he had some Japanese after World War II, I don't know the exact period after, they were going to the United States and were trying to set up Toyota production. So he was a vice president of Toyota at the time. I think maybe general manager, but eventually went to vice president. And they went back to the States, and they were very fascinated by American supermarkets. This is in the 50s. Because they didn't have those in Japan. And so they were very fascinated about that. So he's asking all these guys to come back, what do you do in a supermarket? And they're explaining it to him. He wasn't even in one, but he had the right idea. How you took the cart and went around, grabbed all the stuff, and checkout counter and all that sort of thing. And then he started thinking about that. He started thinking about automobile production and that. He says, well, we can fold that idea into automobile production. Supermarkets? Nobody ever thought about that before. Let me tell you what he does. We're thinking about it the wrong way. What we really want to do is when you're getting supplies coming to assembly line and all that, the various parts, and until you finally go to the assembly line and walks out the back door, we're doing it the wrong way. Instead of top down, we got to go bottom up. What we want to do is just like the customer goes in the store and picks stuff off the shelf, the later provider, in other words, you have the earlier provider, the later provider, the later provider. So he says, treat each later incident as the customer and the earlier incident as the provider. So you have a chain of providers and customers, providers, until ultimately it goes out the door. And he said, what we want to do, instead of the provider giving to the customer tells the provider exactly what he wants and when he wants it, called the just-in-time system. He got out of the supermarket. So he sets a reverse information flow from the bottom up to the top, in which they only get what they want at the time they want it at. Using that supermarket idea. Instead of just pushing stuff down, the guy's got to put it together and goes out the door. And by doing it that way, by upsetting, inverting the whole process, he was able to get a whole bunch of inventory out, what he didn't have to have, expensive inventory. Plus the fact, since they only wanted to amount, therefore, and since they're looking at it more carefully, they're not making as many goofs in terms of the automobiles. And there's some other things he folded in there in terms of what you call single-minute exchange of die and a whole bunch of other stuff by which they're able to actually run, but when they set that process in motion, they, instead of having a production line for this car, a production line for this car, and a production line for this car, they have one production line and run a whole mixed flow going down a production line, all different kinds of cars, and keep track and actually have higher quality with less labor. Beautiful synthesis. And the book's called The Toyota Production System by Taiichi Ono. And you want to read it? There's another guy by the name of Shigeo Shingo. Let me tell you what he did. In fact, he worked with Ono. And they worked together. Very complementary skills. Very different guys, but very complementary, very strong-willed people. And what Ono did is one of the key things that, Shingo, one of the key things that Ono did, or saw, he saw it actually before Shingo did, but Shingo's figured out how to do it. He said, the problem we have is that if you want to run more than one, they recognize they want to run more than one model down the line, but then they have a thing called industrial engineering, some of you people might have heard, of course, economic lot quality, or quantity, optimal lots and that. And so if you make too small a lot, why then, economies go out the window. So in any case, Ono figured what we really have to learn how to do is you have these die. What happens if you go to another